People don't quit jobs, they drift from poor leadership.
Core values and core behaviors that you're transferring now to your culture.
What are some core ways leaders can support their employees?
I've always built a team that I've wanted to win, and that's because I felt confident, or I've built a connection and that we all win.
Michael, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. I'm excited, Brandon.
We're going to talk about your book, and it's doing really well right now. Employee Drift, Leading People Purposefully in Support, Clarity, and Trust. And early in the book, you said that people don't quit jobs, they drift from poor leadership. What's an example of this from your personal or professional life that maybe illustrates this point?
Oh, a tough one right away. I just, for myself, I remember just being in a meeting and being kind of called out. And as a result of that, kind of being caught unprepared, and it kind of puts a ding in the trust side. So I think one of the things that are ways that I see often is that people then begin to go sideways a little bit or have less energy or enthusiasm when they tend to be kind of either humiliated or at least put in a spot, or I've seen a lot of too not taking credit. The boss takes the credit for what you've done. So I think those are just little ways that seem to sort of ding the relationship. And what I write to basically is that people begin to show up a little differently and maybe less excited to put the extra time in or do something for somebody because they're not so sure their boss is for them.
Yeah, in my field, I hear a lot about like employee burnout, and it's tough to sometimes get to the root cause of this. And you talk about employee drift, and I love this idea. Like, maybe what are some of those common causes that cause the employee?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that most people, outside of a summer job, most people go into a quote unquote real job or a company to stay there a long time and want to invest in. But one of the biggest things I see is just that most leadership is very transactional. And so over time, people feel used. And as a kind of transactional happens, you're constantly withdrawing from that relationship. And over time, there's nothing left to withdraw from. Mm-hmm. And so I have found that to be the case as I go into people's offices. So people tend to drift from really a lack of trust, a lack of feeling that their boss is for them. I think people not having a direct advancement path, people not feeling as though they're getting the credit that they are due. So I guess it's a variety of reasons. But it's usually not one thing. It almost like builds and compounds. And then over time, they begin looking elsewhere or get a call from a recruiter or have lunch with a friend and say like, wow, that's not the way it is at my place. And your heart begins to drift, and then your eyes follow, your heart goes. And before you know it, you're updating your resume.
You were an MBA executive during the 1992 MBA Dream Team era, and you wrote about how during that era, MBA was in hyper growth, which I'm a huge fan. So I recognize like just the talent that we had during that era, and it's so fun to watch. But you described the culture internally as the Wild West. Describe what it was like and what maybe contributed to the way you think about leadership and employee drift after you got out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely one that was very fast paced in a sense that many of us, I mean, David Stern would tell you that too, that when we launched through the Olympic brand, no one really had that great of an idea of what was going to happen, but there was enough vision there that they knew the Olympic brand was stronger to pull the MBA brand. And what ended up happening, though, it just really accelerated growth. So what I remember, what we thought were going to be 1, 3, 5-year plans, we were hitting in months. And as a result of that, everybody was chasing us to do business with us because we dominated on such a global stage, right? We went from, let's say, North America exposure, if you will, to now immediately in 150 or 175 countries in a 3-week window. And the Magic Johnsons, the Michael Jordan that maybe people had heard of. But again, it's at a time, 92, when the internet wasn't there.
Right.
So it's hard for people maybe to get their arms around it. Well, it just gave us tremendous exposure. And that's what accelerated everything so fast. And so when I say Wild Wild West, it was a time where we didn't really have budgets. We didn't really have a lot of guardrails. It was basically grow the business and deliver more revenue and profit and brand strength than the previous year, but really the previous month. So the league works for the business owners, each team. And so in a sense, you had these stakeholders as well as then you had, partners like Nike or, let's say Spalding or Wilson, the basketball. So you began delivering value through those relationships. So when I say that, it was very go, 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 and it was very crazy. And that I was the third hire. So we didn't have a lot of structure. And the combination of all of that was simply just chase. And it's good, but at the same time, sometimes it can be rough sledding, where I remember myself having multiple people. It was almost like this matrix system, and you had multiple people. You had not only your the person at the time that was leading international, but you had the head of sponsorship, the head of TV, the head of business development or brand development. You had a lot of reporting structures because we had to communicate, and as a result, again, you had many, many people pulling at you. So to give you some idea again, so we quickly opened up 7 offices within, maybe by 94 or something, 93. And so the Japanese office was one that I had some background in. But even then, because Japan was 12 or 14-hour difference, I would do a full day's work in Tokyo, which meant 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then New York is just waking up. So I would join conference calls. You didn't have video calls. You didn't have the internet, right? And so I would join conference calls and the quality, just wasn't the same. And as you can imagine, we didn't know how to do remote. We didn't know how to do international. So I just remember people having all these side conversations. I'm like, what's going on? What's there? And you felt so left out. Well, if you can imagine, Brandon, midnight comes, my time, which meant 11, 12 o'clock in New York. I'm all amped up, right? I can't go to bed, right?
Right.
And so the reality is that, I worked a lot. Mm-hmm. So it was a David Stern, very driven guy, very visionary, incredible leader. He could step into anything, even at what is like you knew it your whole life. He seemed to know it better. He was just an amazing person that I would always say, boy, I thought I had some vision personally, but he had 10x vision on whatever I had. And he knew just how to ask the right question that would push it and grow it. And he just had incredible ability. So I look at it as a real treat that I had that unique opportunity because it really pushed me. But at the same time, he was very demanding. I think anybody would tell you that. Most visionaries are. They almost expect you to be like them. And as a result, he was sold out and he expected everybody to be on 80 hours a week, that kind of a thing. And so there's good and bad to that, to be honest.
You talked about how David Stern said something that made a lasting impression on you. And he said that you lead people, not manage stuff, or you manage stuff like that. What did that have an impact on you? Like, why does that stick out as like a big moment for you?
Yeah, it was at a time that I was being sent over to Japan, and we actually had a Japanese partner that, like, someone made a crazy deal. I don't know if it was under the previous commissioner, Larry O'Brien or whatever, but they never did anything with it. And it was never worth anything. And so he was sending me into a culture that's all about seniority and it's all about putting in time. And I was a young executive in my 20s. And so he wanted me to go over to kind of be a spy or boots on the ground. And what he was envisioning me with is that leadership is not about a title. So I didn't have to be sent over as a president. I was just being sent over as a manager or something. And it might have been even titleist. It was all about connection with people. And that's how you influence. And so you wanted to remind me that people are people and they desire a connection or a relationship. And you move the needle through a relationship or connection, and it's really building trust. That's irrelevant of a title. And it doesn't matter that they are this small team over there wasn't sort of reporting directly to me, but he wanted me to go in and basically become their leader and to do it in a way that was, he saw people skills in me, that I could connect well with people. And he wanted me to keep that focus, to not fall trap to thinking I was less than, because the guy that was running that department at the time in Japan, I think he might have been in his 50s, right? So I almost had to lead up, and he was telling me to lead up and lead horizontally. And so that stuck with me because I was able to move the needle and build trust, built on building relationships, because that whole team was around my age, despite this guy being older. And they seemed, because of obviously being American and understood the brand, and more importantly, our DNA, there was a clear divide that they didn't get it. And so when it was time, which was again, after about a year, that contract was up for renewal, I said, we can do it ourselves and do it better. And that's what we did. We took control of it ourselves.
When you look back at your own leadership career, do you think you ever contributed to employee drift at any point? And if so, what behaviors do you think contributed to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I've been finding as I wrote this book, I thought maybe it was just me, but so many people comment to me that they can find themselves in this book.
Yep.
That whether that's either like they're a summer job or maybe their entry level job, or maybe even currently even at a C-level job, that there's something in that that we can become better leaders, right? So I when I got out of college, I actually did an internship for Pepsi. And when I got out of school, I got hired. And so I quickly got promoted a number of times, but I was maybe 22, 23, and I had a team of 6 people that were all older than me. And there was no manual. And that's when I felt I was very, very production oriented, very transactional oriented. That's the only way I can say it. I wasn't necessarily people oriented, and I didn't understand that people are people. And so what I often did is I used people and led in a very productional, transactional way that was very shallow, that was doing just enough to almost trick them, but to feel like I can understand them. But I really wasn't interested in understanding them. I was interested in my numbers. So in a sense, I write that the drift comes, or the leadership comes, in that it's so focused on yourself and you climbing the ladder. But really, when you begin the shift to put people first and begin that connection, that ultimately carries you a lot further. So yes, I have found myself in it. I have led by, painfully. I've fired people, I've so forth. And so part of this book is basically saying, boy, if I could do it over, and in how I lead as a leadership coach now, is beginning to connect many of the stops I had, but then also finding that there's really 3 main buckets that I think can move people. And that's building trust, and that's giving them real clarity in their role, and then supporting them to do their job and win at their job. So, to get back to your question, absolutely. I've failed enough to know, and I see it now in so many environments that they bring me in, that there's some stress, or there's high attrition, or I'm not sleeping, or there's friction in the leadership team. And a lot of that is we're just not leading kind of what I think are people first. So I come in with something called fighting for your people's highest good. And I didn't learn that. I learned that really after the NBA, I'll be honest. I learned that in a very unique role, and learned from someone special, that I began to connect many, many dots. And that's when my leadership shifted and really began to, I think, lead much better.
Glad you said that point, because I was going to ask you about using the 1992 Dream Team era as an example of like where all your leaders are probably just managing the processes, trying to develop, get outcomes, and just growth mode completely. And they probably had no awareness of employee drift at the time because they were so focused on the end goal. You realized it after you left, right? What probably flaws were happening in the culture, and probably saw the signs after the fact. Do you think that's the case with most leaders where they don't even see the employee drifting happening in the moment, and it's probably too late at that point? Like, unpack that for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think that's part of sort of what I do as a leadership coach now, to try to grow people's awareness of themselves, but then their team, right? It always starts with yourself, right? And I always pose this question: do you know what it's like to be on the other side of you? And it's a powerful question. Yeah. So it immediately gets them to stop. I mean, I don't know if you're married, but it's a great tool in marriage to say, hon, how am I doing? And when you have those date nights, checking in. So it's the same kind of concept where nobody asked me that. I mean, again, back in the 90s at the MBA, you didn't have, mental health was not even talked about. You were weak if you were sort of that way. And so I'm so glad the growth in our kind of culture, if you will, that we're willing to talk about those things. But so I start there of saying, let's help you grow yourself. And as you grow yourself, you're naturally going to grow the people and invest in the people. So get people to shift from trying to be the healthiest you or a work in progress you. And then as you pour into your team, because your team will more than likely model you and your leadership based on if you're hiring off of core values and core behaviors. And then as they feel and believe and feel heard and seen that you get them and that you're for them, walls come down and that trust is built, and they run through walls for you, right? But that ultimately is the game changer. They sense you are for them. And so therefore the things that you're telling them or showing them and working with you is for their own good. But it does take time. This is a ongoing process. This is not a guilt and shame, and this is not a one-off. So like the annual reviews, I don't even believe in them. I believe in ongoing, continuous conversations, more and more of the weekly, bi-monthly, all that kind of stuff. The more interaction and the more authentic self you can bring in. And that has changed dramatically from the 90s. The 90s, it was a time where you weren't encouraged to admit failure. You weren't encouraged to kind of be authentic. It's kind of weird now that I look back at it. So it's changed over the last 20 years. So the good news is I'm old and I take a lot of those experiences in, but there are still a lot of hiccups. But again, it's helping people and their leadership team, initially the leaders, to begin growing and modeling so they can recognize the sign in their team.
Michael, you use the metaphor of referred pain to describe how businesses often misdiagnose workplace issues. And I love this metaphor. It's like, treating symptoms like burnout or disengagement without addressing the deeper source. So when you identify the real root cause as a lack of support, clarity, and trust, we'll get into those too. But from your experience, why do leaders often default to treating surface level problems like maybe performance issues or low morale without really digging into the deeper cultural misalignments? And, what can be done to help leaders recognize when what's hurting isn't actually what the real problem lies?
Yeah. I mean, we're so, think about what we do ourselves, right? We just navigate naturally to short-term pain or to symptoms. And so we see things and it's a knee-jerk reaction. But really often that just brings it to the surface. But when you dig deeper into the root is where the real fruit is. And so that's really what I try to go after. So yes. So things like under trust are often communication and relationship issues. But the root of it is a lack of trust or a alignment and execution issues in a business often relate back to a lack of clarity. People don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So I refer to that referred pain because it does. It snapshots it well. I mean, the easiest one is brain freeze, right? We all relate to brain freeze. And we think that by, whatever something we have is really cold, that's where it's stuck, but it's actually something much deeper. And so the reality is I recently had a surgery on my ankle, and where all my pain was coming from was my hip or my lower back. And so I kept thinking it was a hip problem, but really the root was because I was feeling pain in my ankle. I began walking differently, and I began stretching out the muscles in my hip, which led to a lower back pain. And so that's what's always stuck with me is so often we see someone that maybe quits and think, well, that's just on them. And, we don't have a problem with that. But as you dig deeper, there's a lot more to common sort of these symptoms add up to maybe a deeper pain point. And so I try to encourage people actually to go through an assessment. I do, and I connect it to a book, but I connect it to my website. And I would love to offer that free to your listeners, but it's basically answering some simple questions of symptoms. And then they get a printout that basically begins to identify really what's the real root here so that they're attacking the root and not wasting their time on something totally irrelevant, right? I mean, when you're dealing with people, nothing's linear.
No.
So when I continue to say, support, clarity, and trust, it doesn't go that way. You might, like I said, have drama in the office, which they might have nothing to do with a support issue. It's probably more than likely a trust issue. And so let's attack that. And let's attack the communication. And I use kind of visual tools as a way of getting at that and fixing the roots. So, that's been a one that I'm glad you picked up on that, because that referred pain, I've gotten a lot of positive reaction to because people can relate to it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Your example of like the ankle surgery thing. I mean, years ago, I went through like major sciatic nerve pain and like it was radiating my right leg just nonstop. And I would throw ibuprofen at it and it would temporarily help, but it was never addressing the root cause until I finally got an MRI after months of PT and it didn't work. And then it's like, oh, I got a 7 millimeter bulge disc that's on my sciatic nerve and there's nothing but surgery to help it. So it's like, it's an awareness around what's actually causing the problem. And there's a lot of work that goes into addressing the root cause. And I think that's why I love the ideas in your book, because without awareness around what might be causing something, you're not going to do the work to go identify the cause. You're just going to be like, oh, that person left and it's on, like you said, it's on them. And then you're not even going to do the work to figure out like why. And do an exit interview, perhaps.
And you repeat the cycle, right? And that's what I see so often when I go into a lot of offices is that often maybe it's the demands of the job. They just don't have the capacity, so they take the easy way out instead of working hard, right? And probably the most obvious thing is I get a lot of questions about, I don't want to have a hard conversation with somebody, so I'll just do it.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're avoiding things or you're pushing it down and it just bubbles up and it explodes in another way. That's also then another symptom of a bigger root, right? And so it's getting people to begin to slow and saying, what I always do is hard conversations, really, if you reframe them as just growth conversations, they take the eyes off of you or yourself and onto helping both parties, the leader and the individual, grow. And I guarantee months ahead will be a lot easier and smoother because there's curiosity and growth there instead of avoidance.
I want to get into a little bit of the support, clarity, and trust that you talk about at length in the book. But when you describe support as giving people what they need to truly succeed and not just really being nice or offering perks, a lot of leaders, like even with good intentions, seem to miss the mark on this. What are some core ways leaders can support their employees the way you describe it in the book?
Yeah, I think it's a big one is that making sure that they have the information and the tools We often think of the physical tools to do their job. But I also think, and I couch sort of accountability on that, and that goes a little bit back to the hard conversation. But one of the biggest things I have found is that not all people learn the same way you do. And when I say that is that it's not just about, boy, I've told that guy 5 times and he just doesn't get it, or he smiles and nods and he just doesn't get it. I have found that often people listen with their eyes, meaning some are visual learners. And so I use tools a lot. And one of the big ones in the support area is saying, if I have a heart of helping get my people to become the best version of themselves, sometimes it can be encouragement through support, but then sometimes it's having a challenge or those tough conversations to grow them. And so I put that in a support column, is understanding your people. And in particular, I call this moving from a transactional leadership to a covenant leadership. And what I mean by that is making sure people, there's that connection that they know you are for them. And as a result, some of the things that you're going to share might be viewed as hard or challenging, but you're doing it for them, not just for make me as a leader look good, or not that I'm going to hit a number, but you generally care and you're building into them. And so this tool of support and challenge, or nurture and challenge, I like to call it, is basically moving them into a box where there's a balance between knowing what they sort of need to hear, want to hear, when at times you need to pull back and be encouraged, or encourage them or affirm them, but then also times to sort of get into their face and have those tough conversations, better understand what happened here. And so I speak to that under support, because I think a lot of people, or at least I was more of a leader at Pepsi as a cheerleader, but avoided the hard conversations. And I quickly found out it didn't help grow my people. In fact, it didn't help grow me. And so the more that I can sit in the space of looking at how can I grow them and grow me? So it's sitting down in those one-on-ones, or even collectively celebrating wins, but also celebrating misses or learning from misses. And that's where the challenge comes in, to say, how can I do this better? So it's a little bit of a different take, but it's built around that accountability. The accountability is not this nasty kind of leprosy word and always viewed with negativity, but accountability can be celebrated when you hit those goals and don't move on to them too fast, but actually then celebrate. But it also can be in forms of challenging them that they can do better. That one of the things that I see is often people don't know their own ceiling. And so when someone can come and see, boy, I think there's more in you, but in you in a positive way, that you're almost freeing people, but they don't see it. I think so often everyone's so close to the trees. And so that's a little bit like a consultant comes in and sees something a little differently. They don't see it in themselves. So when I can go in and say, boy, there's still meat on the bone here. I think this person can do a little bit better, a little bit more. Or have you looked at it differently this way? It challenges them to grow in a different way. And so that's a little bit what I call support. Support isn't always just physical tools. It's also giving the person what they need to sort of having them step into their highest good.
That's why I think like great leaders are often great coaches. And we've seen this in the NBA, right? Where you have a player that's on one team and then they shift to another team and just completely become a superstar.
Right.
They needed the right environment to reach their ceiling or their full potential.
Yeah. And I think so often think about it that, the leader themselves is they're the lid. And I know you've heard it probably from the John Maxwell's, et cetera, but it's so true. If I myself am bumping up to a ceiling, how can I possibly even know what it looks like for my team to grow past me? And so I try to first start with that leader and the leadership team to grow their ceiling. And then cheerlead or help your team grow because you're all going to grow. Don't look at it as a negative, like, oh no, I'm going to be threatened.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of we're going to grow the water level so all boats rise, right? And when you can feel good or build a culture based on having people sort of smarter people than you, I don't know why. I've always had that. I've always built a team that I've wanted to win, and that's because I felt confident or I've built a connection and that we all win. And so I think that part of support is critical to almost seeing your team grow past you so that one day, if they leave the company, more than likely they're leaving to chase a passion or they're stepping into a role that maybe is a higher level role for them. And so back to a sports, how big is your coaching tree? Mm-hmm. And so I've been very fortunate that going back to days of the NBA, I have people that started their own business or became presidents of different companies. And so now my role is not direct report. It's a almost mentoring or coaching role, cheering them on. And so when you can have that mentality of you're actually building better leaders, but you're building better people, it seems to come back to you in spades. It always does.
You write about how lack of clarity causes good people to burn out and drift ultimately. What's one thing a leader can do today to start bringing more clarity to their team, especially like when you describe the NBA as like fast moving, we're just focused on, the growth and just keeping up with the demand of what others are wanting. When it's like chaotic and fast moving like that, like, what's something we can implement as leaders, if we had awareness, of course, to bring clarity to our employees?
Yeah. I mean, I see this as a big one because I do think when I sit with people and they're like, well, what should be my goals or different things? I find that, which on surface, it doesn't seem that way, but clarity really begins internally.
Yeah.
It's like you have to have a understanding of who you are and kind of where you're heading in your role and your strengths and weaknesses. So yes, to your point, self-awareness. And so I, again, have some incredible tools of self-reflection back to what are your leadership tendencies and what are some of your bad patterns, if you will, to stress or to money, etc. But as you step into that, I guess when I go in to companies, I unpack this as the leader often holds on to something too long, and so I think there's control or growth, but there's not control and growth. So at the NBA, in a sense, it was everybody pulling at us. So if David Stern would have just said, everything has to go through me, he ultimately becomes the bottleneck, right? And I see this in many departments or companies that want to grow from 5 million to 20 million or departments to grow is learning to empower your people. And one of the funny stories I share in there is about the fish in the fish tank. I don't know if you remember that one. But it was going in, like I said, in Japan, there's a groupthink mentality. And so back at least in the 90s, there was this open space sort of culture where there are no partitions, desks on desks. Everybody heard every phone call. But then on the outside, there's those people that had an office that you knew they were important. And I always remember going into this big sponsorship deal. I think it might have been Samsung or somebody. And I didn't know really what I was stepping into. And the guy had a door. So I immediately flagged that this guy must be important. But what was crazy is he had a fish tank in his office. And it was almost like a Nemo fish, but a fish caught my eye. And he began telling me the story of this fish that it will grow the size of its fish tank. Mm-hmm. So what I saw was maybe a foot-long fish, but he often says most of these are at 2 inches. And he even said, as a leader, the challenge is, are you putting your people in bigger fish tanks where they can grow? And part of that growth, back to the clarity question, is empowering them to own it and to make decisions. And so when you can step away from becoming the bottleneck but actually growing them and delegating them, but also empowering them with decision making, that's when things really take off. And that clarity begins in the leader. So if the leader doesn't have the confidence or the self-awareness to say, I'm going to let you make this decision, right? Or hangs on, the team just can't move fast enough.
Right. Yeah.
And so when they can, though, and they begin pushing off, you're sort of, in a sense, starting to scale. And you're starting to scale because you've built a core values and a core behaviors that you're transferring not only your culture, but your responsibilities into your team, that it naturally will take off. And then they begin thinking no longer like a small business, but an entrepreneur, right? So that's my big thing is I go into often offices and the guy who started it is still thinking like he has 5 employees and his finger has to be in everything.
Yeah.
And now he has 25, he has 30, or his own team is 25 as a leadership team. You can't possibly hang on to that. And so you have to structure understanding what is something I do better than others. And then almost like this inverted hourglass, the top should have maybe 2 or 3 things that they're doing and only they can do and do well that are significant to the title. The bottom of your food chain is the entry level. They should have the same, but it's this middle area, this manager, director level that manages and leads people should have the most. I don't see that. Often I see the C level or the top person hanging on to everything, and it actually slows down. It signals to me right away. So that's the symptom part I see, right? It signals to me, well, you have a clarity issue. And so I quickly go into tools that help them grow so that they're able to then transfer and empower and delegate. And that's where I see a lot of people don't know how to do that well.
Michael, you're right about that. Trust isn't just earned, it's led. What's one small, powerful habit leaders can do to build a culture of trust?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think this is the biggest thing that I've learned over my years, and that's in building that connection with people. I mean, there's so many. It's just being authentic. Do you know who you are so that you can be authentic with your people? So it's admitting when you've sort of messed up. But I would say, probably on for everybody, it's the words you use. So I've gone into cultures where I've just felt this heaviness because the leader is almost passive aggressive language. He's calling out people. I mean, just the words that he's using, it's not edifying. So what I say, a real simple way to move a needle is simply using words of affirmation. And so calling up people, not calling out people, for example, or telling people what you like about them in terms of what they did well on a project. And it's not lying. It's basically saying, man, you're I love the way you put PowerPoints together. You're incredible. Just some of that affirmation in a world, I think, that doesn't get that tends to be cynical. And if you can come in simply by the words you choose that are positive and affirming, it sends the signal again, you get me, you're for me, my walls start coming down. Therefore, I'm no longer working for you, I'm working with you. And that's the sort of language of building teams and language that are with you, not sort of talking at you. And so when you, as a leader, begin to sort of saying, I'm not up here, but I'm in the trenches, so they're leading out of influence and respect, your teams will go farther, right? And there's no better example than sports teams. I'm in the Michigan area and so clear the Detroit Lions, right? They've been a doormat team my entire life. In fact, I gave my son, who's about 28, he moved to Tennessee a number of years ago. I gave him the freedom to start rooting for the Titans. I said, this was probably 3-4 years ago, right? And a guy named Dan Campbell came in, who's kind of a blockhead, right? He wasn't a great player, but he's an incredible leader that began to build with and not at. And as a result, his players will play injured. He transformed the culture and they run through walls. And as a result, the Lions are one of the better teams, right? We have a chance for a Super Bowl over the last year and this year and next few years. That's a great way of leading where he continually says, I'm trying to put smarter, better people around me. My coaching staff now are being poached and all of that. I'm not threatened by that at all. I'm still a blockhead. So he's very authentic. So it's that kind of a mentality. And I didn't learn that probably until after the NBA. And then I take these lessons in what I call covenant leading, and that's that trust building and the words we use and the actions, etc. But that's what sort of begins to make a difference, and people feel it and see it. And I guarantee you will move needles quicker when you have that sort of connection built.
I love that because I personally believe that to transform a workplace culture in a positive way, that leaders have to be intentional and take action. And otherwise, culture is just going to happen to you. And I'm sure that happened to the Detroit Lions when leaders before Dan Campbell were not intentional about the culture. So what's an effective way for leaders to reflect, take action, and implement some of the things that you're talking about in this book?
Yeah, I mean, a real simple one, obviously, is to read the book. And it's a quick read, and I think there's a high level kind of philosophy to it. But then I just encourage anybody, clients or anybody, for free, hop on my website and take an assessment because it goes through symptoms. And if you can start relating to some of these things along with alignment and execution and relationships and culture things, then it'll start to help you zero in on sort of what are some of these roots that might be damaged. And so then it's take this free assessment, begin to look at that. And obviously you can solve it yourself, but then it's hopping on and us having a free conversation to talk things through. I tend to teach, as I said earlier, people tend to connect words with visuals. And so I lead with tools. And these visual tools can be very short. It often is a really quick one, but I have ones from self-assessment, like I asked earlier, what is it like to be on the other side of you, to actually how do we improve execution, how do we improve core values, all of that kind of stuff. So people tend to be all over the board, but it will save you time, frustration, and usually the sleepless nights and lots of attrition if you can quickly focus on the root and not waste your time on some other system or some other symptom that isn't the hot button at the time. So that's what I encourage you to do.
Michael, to close my conversations, I always like to ask this one question. What's one experience, person, or idea that most shaped the way you think about leadership or transforming workplace culture? And how does this still influence you to this day?
Oh, that's a good one, Brandon. I love it. Yeah, I would have to say, believe it or not, when after I left the NBA, I worked with a guy, Paul, that he took a lot of what David Stern did, but he added a people element that I ultimately kind of called covenantal leading versus transactional leading. And that's that building that deep connection and trust. And as a result, people see your authenticity and they begin to do things for you on a relationship. And then you begin to not only sort of have a relationship where you can be more real, but also a relationship where you actually would become more productive so that failing is okay. There's really what I'm getting at is there's freedom in that covenant, trusting, caring, and sharing, not to the point where, again, you're not challenging, you're actually challenging more, but there's the engagement, there's the collaboration, but more than not, there's an influence has created you as a leader that you're influencing them. And that was a part that was never really taught well because I always thought it was about a title and it's nothing. It's really about the relationship. And so in this role with Paul, I grew something up to 150 countries and thousands of people. And how I led was through that as empowerment. And so that's why a lot of these secrets are in the book. And I boil them down to 3 studs, right? The support, clarity, and trust. And there's many angles to that. But that would be something I would say the very basics of be authentic and build trust and build connection. that will move the needle the quickest.
Michael, what's the best way for people to connect with you, buy the book, follow your work, connect with you, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it's going to my website, and I'm sure you'll post it because my name might be a little complicated to spell. But then LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, and then, buy the book. I think that's probably the cheapest first step, right? Buy the book and see if it resonates, and then take the assessments. Let's have a conversation. And I think you'll quickly find that I have a heart to see you win. So as a result, I often give away too much, but I really would rather have you win than whether it results in us journeying together. So I come with open hands.
My guest today has been Michael Wozniak, the author of Employee Drift, Leading People Purposefully in Support, Clarity, and Trust. Michael, thanks for coming on the show.
I loved it, Brandon. I keep cheering you on. You do a great job, and I so enjoy your episodes every time you send one out.
Thank you.